Pivoting in the Mundane Apocalypse, the past, present, and future of festivals. I should mention that it's in the context of my festival experience, and at the one end we have Glastonbury, and at the other end we have, I suppose, micro film festivals. Mine is a screenwriting event, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty of it in a moment. So it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all conversations, but I try to remain strong towards principles as opposed to rules, so that the principles should apply to almost everything that we want to do. And I've also given it a very strong inflection towards, if you want to do something in this area, how to do it based on the very, very limited and short period of time I've had to pull together all my experiences. Like everybody in this world, it's just over 1 year now. So we have no more than 1 year's worth of experience. That said, it has been very, very intensive. So who am I? I'm a filmmaker, first and foremost. I've made a bunch of feature films. I've made short films, one of which that got very close to the Oscars a few years ago, got to the final 10, got to number 6 of 5 nominations. So I was one movie away from going to the Oscars. Terribly exciting. Got in the Guinness Book of Records with a feature film that I made. I'm an author. With Bloomsbury, I wrote a book called The Guerrilla Filmmaker's Handbook, which has sold 500,000 copies now, which is a kind of practical how-to guide to be an independent filmmaker. And I'm also the founder of the London Screenwriters Festival, which is technically currently in its 9th year, about to go into its 10th iteration. But again, it's all become very COVID merged. So we'll get into the details of that. And yes, I am very tired, like the rest of us. But fair warning, I'm not even a half glass full kind of guy. I'm a completely overflowing glass kind of guy. So I prepare to be elevated in energy, which I think something everybody could do with in the Zoom generation. So today, what is it about? It's about sharing my journey. It's about sharing the insights that I've had running an international festival, and also creating a brief roadmap should you wish to follow and create something for yourself, whether that's, a screening of 3 or 4 films on a Tuesday night to 12 people, or whether you want to do something more ambitious. All of what we're going to talk about is going to apply. And it's partly an invitation, really, because we are living into a new digital era, and I want to urge everybody to give up as much resistance to that as you possibly can. Otherwise, you will be left behind. It's kind of that simple. And, I look back in time now, and I'm sure most people, or many people do, and go, I really wish I could uninvent social media. I'm really tired of social media. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what I think. It's here to stay. It doesn't, the politics of it, the impact on society, we can have lots and lots of debates about that, but it's here to stay, and it's a part of our landscape. So it is something, along with all the other digital flora and fauna that have flourished over the last year, we have to engage with it, because that is the world that we're living in. So a few opening thoughts to get us going. The first thing is the currency of 2021, and I think this has been the currency for some time, is attention. It's like, how long can I keep your attention before you kind of drift over to your phone and quietly start scrolling on Facebook in order to see something? So let's just watch a clip. Isn't that fantastic? So yes, the currency of 2021 is attention. Really, everything that we do within the context of our audience and who we are making it for, it just has to beat that. And that orangutan watching a magic trick was something that came up on Facebook 25 minutes ago. So I only put it in. I previously had a cat on a skateboard. So that's just gone into the presentation. That's how current it is. And yes, I watched the whole clip and it charmed me. And I watched it again. I enjoyed it so much. That is what we're up against. That is very, very attention-grabbing content. And I hate that word content. certainly in the context of being someone who creates. I don't create content. Look, I don't want to be so pretentious as to say I create magical moments or art, or that's for other people to describe it. But to diminish everything down to content, I think is pretty grim. But it kept my attention. I'm hoping it kept your attention, if only just to make the point. So now that we understand the currency is keeping your attention, the next thing I've learned over the process of doing many, many things like this is always start with the strongest thing, whatever the strongest thing is. And usually that is the point in this context. What is the point of this conversation that we're having? So I would say that the digital revolution that we're living into, the success and the opportunities for all of us who are involved in this conversation lie in us being prepared to do what others are not prepared to do. We can think of it another way. Look at what everybody else is doing and don't do that. Do something differently because they're not prepared to do that. And here's another way to think about it. There's gold out in the digital hills, but you've got to go out there and you've got to dig and you've got to get dirty in order to get the gold. And most people love to have a cappuccino and talk about how they will go off into the hills and dig one day, and that one day someday leads to nowhere. So it's about taking action, informed, passionate, massive, dynamic, speed. It's all of that stuff. We're going to get to it later, and it will illustrate why that manifests something magical out in the world. But fundamentally, it's about being digitally distinct. How are you different? How are you memorable? What causes people to click on you or your brand or your product or your festival that other people just might pass over? So those are some opening thoughts about, I like a bedrock, a kind of ground rock for the conversation. And here's a few thoughts about the actual world that we've all been pushed into since last March. So we are definitely, when I've trained filmmaking for 20 years, and for the last 10 years, I've been banging on about how we're living inside a technological evolution revolution. And in the last year, the promise of that has skyrocketed. And we're truly in a new era of tech culture, connection, knowledge, wealth, power, all of those things, and many, many other words that would accurately describe it. But we're also living in an age of COVID, and there's going to be a legacy to COVID. We're living inside the legacy now, I think. We're kind of through the worst part of it, and we're starting to live into the legacy. But with COVID comes a decision, and it's one of the things I want you to kind of consider, that for you personally, you kind of generally, I don't know what you do, so you may have experienced various aspects of this, but most people have one decision, which is, how am I going to interact with COVID? How am I personally? Maybe you have to think about your family as well, and maybe there's some job implications. For someone who organizes an international event with 1,000 people, I have to consider 1,000 opinions and make decisions based on those 1,000 decisions. And at the one extreme, we have people who will say, yes, I refuse to be injected with Bill Gates microchips. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have people who have very serious asthma. And, if somebody sniffles 10 feet away from them, they recoil. So, we have a full spectrum of people to consider in a way that we didn't have to consider it last February, March. That's something, again, that is kind of the world into which we're living. And I want to kind of present a new model for the world as well. And this was presented to me, 10 years ago, this idea, and I've just kind of expanded on it. Imagine that we all lived on Digital Island, and on Digital Island, planet Earth, digital planet Earth, there will be digital natives. And those are the people who you can put a phone in their hand and you say, here's a new piece of software, and within 15 seconds, they're using it without any effort whatsoever. They're generally young people. I think I would possibly just about squeeze myself into a digital native, in so much as I love digital technology and I pick it up and I squeeze it, but I'm definitely getting fatigued with it, definitely getting tired. So there's a new category that I may fall into. And then there are digital immigrants, people who have kind of learned to use the technology, and they think that they look like the digital natives, but they really don't. And the digital natives either ignore them or snigger at them, but they're not natives. They're functioning, but they're operating on digital island along with everybody else. And then we've got, I think, the category I may be slipping into, and I've made these names up, so this is by no means scientific, the digital elderly, which is like, if you want to know whether you're a digital elderly, just go onto TikTok. And if your brain explodes and you're like, okay, I'm out, you may be slipping into becoming digitally elderly. It's not a great phrase, and I'll probably refine that because I wrote it today. And like, I'm sure there's a better way to do it. And then we got our digital deniers, the conspiracy theorists. So they've got resistance to digital technology, and we all know somebody who has left Facebook because they don't like the terms and conditions on Facebook. They're usually back within 12 weeks or 12 days. But and then we've also got the digi exit, which is my riff on Brexit. People have gone, that's it, I'm out, I'm done with it. And again, they'll probably be back, but in a lesser format. And we've all got people in our lives who are like that. And then we've got, I suppose, the digital fatigued, people who've just kind of had enough of it and are just slowly just discovering that they're not engaged with it as much as they used to be. And also have a, FOMO, that awful feeling that there's this great big party going on some social media platform and they're not really part of it. The reason why this is important in the context of this conversation is that I found out, got a lot of very kind of surprising data on who engages online and why. None of it is scientific, it's all anecdotal, but there were definitely some patterns to it. So we're going to drill down into that. So we just remember those categories, digital natives, someone who's 19 is almost certainly a digital native. I remember my brother's little girl a few years back, I was talking to her and she was making eye contact with me at the same time as writing a message on her phone. She wasn't even looking at her fingers, and she just knew autocorrect would make her sentence make sense. Digital native right there versus me, maybe digital immigrant. I don't know. I'm still not sure whether I'm a native or immigrant. So there's some categories to think about. And then a question: how do we survive and thrive in 2021? Living with COVID or post-COVID, whatever post-COVID world looks like. And I think there are three factors here, and then we're going to get into the festival. So the first one is having an ability to anticipate. And that is a kind of combination of experience and instinct, to be able to look into the future and kind of project with some accuracy what is going to happen. So that's one of the factors I think that we're going to need to develop to survive and thrive in 2020-21. Another one is the ability to adapt, to go, okay, that whole thing that I've made doesn't work. I now just have to abandon it and build something else new. COVID really kicked the ass of so many people because they were not prepared for the mundane apocalypse. In some ways, if it had been a much worse pandemic and, the death rate had been higher, and I think possibly psychologically, people who have suffered in business may have done better, because there's kind of no denying that it was just terrible and awful, as it is. But I think, we've been lucky in so much as we've just kind of had a very, very strong slap in the face from nature to say, wake up and stop abusing the planet. But it does take some courage to adapt to this ever-changing landscape that we find ourselves in. And then the agility of non-fungible tokens, which I didn't even know existed until 3 weeks ago. It's like art is being sold using NFTs, Bitcoin, OnlyFans, a whole new ecosystem for the porn industry that's because the porn industry was taken apart and now it's rebuilt itself in this whole new digital e-commerce system. And it's just extraordinary. This has all happened. Clubhouse, if you've got an iPhone, I'm on Clubhouse. I joined it and immediately closed the app. I was like, I don't have time in my head to go into Clubhouse. right now, but I do need to, and I know that I need to. And it's that agility to embrace all of these new technologies and platforms, which are appearing by the second, as well as the existing ones evolving and creating new possibilities. So we live in this extraordinary time of technology where pretty much anything is possible, and you can build a business and start trading for less than £50 in a single day. You could do the whole thing. And, 20 years ago, that wasn't possible. That just was not possible. So it's an extraordinary distinction. So I want to get into the festival. Now we've had a kind of conversation about some stuff, some principles that I think we're going to return to. I want to share with you my personal festival journey. So I run the London Screenwriters Festival. Typically, there would have been one of these events a year. It'd run for 3 days, usually in September. And there'd be 3 days of additional screenwriting masterclasses running up to those 3 days for our international guests who are flying in from Australia. We just give them more great stuff. And we'd usually have around 1,000 visitors joining us at Regent's University in central London, around 150 speakers. And there'd be hundreds of events, side events, parties, script readings, table reads with actors, labs with high-profile Oscar-winning screenwriters. It's extraordinary. It's like this incredible festival of minds and hearts and souls and creative people coming together. I always refer to it as like the lunatics taking over the asylum for 3 straight days. It's the only place I know where, aside from fan conventions, where you can legitimately go and talk about Star Trek for 3 days and nobody will think you're bonkers. So it's just this extraordinary gathering of people. But the key is, that's it. It's all in close proximity. It's a gathering, and that became impossible. So I'm going to get into I'll get into the narrative in a moment. But clearly, for a festival, we can't be in close proximity, certainly not in April 2020. Who knows about May, June, July, August, September? Who knows when it's going to shift? I have some ideas, and I'm sure you have too. I'll just give you a short 90-second clip of what the festival is usually like. Here we go. You can get an idea of what the festival is like. We've had 9 successful years. I literally built it from the ground up with no support from the industry. We've had 0 funding. We have just, for the very first time, 2 weeks ago, got our first funding from the Arts Council in a recovery fund grant, which is amazing because we really need it. And the 10th year was about to be our biggest, but there was a big problem. So here's the problem that we had, is that years 8 and 9 were not the greatest years in terms of performance. So we were already in a fairly bad financial position. I had to let a lot of the staff go. We'd restructured it so that we were going to happen in, believe it or not, April 2020. But we'd pulled it out of the bag. We'd turned the festival around financially. We were going to become profitable this year, and COVID hit with like 4 weeks before the festival was going to take place. And it was honestly an extraordinary catastrophe. So we had to pivot online, and we had to do it really super quick. So just going back to those three principles, the ability to anticipate. So I picked up on COVID personally in January. In fact, I came back to the office on like January 4th and said to the team, I think we got a problem. There's this virus in China called coronavirus. And they looked at me like I was from a different planet. And I started calling all my friends, and the very, very smart people were like, yeah, this might just be a bit of a problem. Because everybody knows we're about to bring 1,000 people, put them in a small, hot, sweaty room together. And that's not great if you've got a deadly virus. And it's kind of, I hope you can cast your mind back to the beginning part of last year when people didn't know how virulent it was, how deadly it was, what it even was. So there was this enormous uncertainty. And even when we closed the office at Ealing Studios, I had two team members who literally thought I was crazy, because surely it can't be a problem. We'd had a meeting with the venue 2 weeks earlier, and they'd said, no matter what happens, we're going ahead with this event. We're not going to put it off for a cold. That's literally the words they said to me. And in my head, I'm like, oh dear, you really don't get it. So we had to have the ability to adapt. So the best way I can describe this is sometime around the latter end of March, we were a logistics company. We were about moving speakers into a venue and making sure our guests would get to the hotel and that they got fed, and our delegates all picked up a pass and that the toilets were cleaned and all of that stuff. So we were very much a logistical company, and we had to pivot overnight into becoming a technology company. And those are not transferable skills. And so some of our team had to leave. One of them left very upset because they felt, that they were not being supported. And I'm like, well, I don't know what to do. You need to be able to use technology. I don't know how to help you if you refuse to use technology. So not everybody could make that pivot. And of course, they had to leave. So they didn't have that ability to adapt. And then the agility to go, okay, we don't know how to do this, but we're going to deliver the world's biggest screenwriting event in 4 weeks' time online, and we've never done it before, ever. Okay, what do we need to do? And that was the challenge. And one thing I've learned in life is if you have a really outrageously enormous, bombastic challenge, people may be a little bit scared, but they go, okay, that is actually worth waking up for and getting out of bed. So it inspires people to follow you on that journey. But I fully admit it's not for everybody. Not everybody wants to be in that kind of crucible. But we were the first. We were huge. We were an enormous success on many, many levels. Not necessarily financially, but on many other levels, we were hugely successful. So London SWF 365, as we called it, May, June 2020, it ran for a whole month. We had 1,500 delegates in the system. 750 of those were LSF delegates from the festival who were supposed to have happened in April, and we just gave them a free pass just to say, look, we don't know what the future holds, but here's a free pass to our amazing free online event in May and June. And then we had another 750 people who paid whatever they could afford. We basically said, please pay £60 for it, but if you can't, then that's fine. So we had around 750 people pay into that pot. And we had 4 weeks of putting on sessions, extraordinary accelerated learning for the team. And we went from not knowing what on earth we were doing to being world leaders in 4 weeks in terms of delivering this kind of experience. And there's a really good lesson inside there about total immersion and literally putting yourself inside of it, like in a pressure cooker, and turning the heat up. And it's amazing what we're able to tolerate and survive, and how we'll actually thrive in that kind of experience. I'm going to come to some of the takeaways of the festival a little bit later. And I want to just talk about the evolving world that we spoke about at the beginning. And just in the context of what we did in May and June last year, remembering our digital island, because 75% of our delegates, whether they paid or they didn't pay, didn't engage. And yes, you could watch it later, you could catch up, like this experience that we're in now. I'm sure there are more people who will watch it recorded later than participate live, but there's definitely something to it being live that is delicious, shall we say. And also, we get to have a conversation at the end of this presentation where we have actual interaction. And I'm just me. At the festival, we had Oscar winners. We had the biggest names in the industry talking. So that 75% disengagement was a surprise. And I spoke to a lot of them. And the common phrase I heard, and I've continually heard this over the last year, is, I just don't want to do it online. I want to be there in person. And I fully get that. I mean, who wants to go to their daughter's wedding on Zoom? I get it. Who wants to see Coldplay at Glastonbury on TV when you want to be in the front row having all of that experience? But that wasn't the world that we were living in at that point. And it arguably may not be entirely the world that we're starting to live into in the future. And there's still quite a lot of denial around that. Around 10% of our delegates, 10 to 15%, were hyper engaged in as much as they showed up to everything on time and they engaged in the chat and they got to know each other. And those are the ones who got the most out of the festival. And of those people, 80% were women. And at first, I was kind of surprised by that. But the more I drilled down into it, the more it made sense. Because anecdotally, we were serving delegates who would not normally be able to attend the festival in London. And just moving aside how we feel politically about it for a moment, the lives that are being lived are, many of the women are the carers at home, either the carers or looking after the kids, can't get time away to go and do this event. So we had a disproportionately high group of mums and single dads who would say, I could never attend. I just want to share with you this message. I'll read it out because it's quite a lot. I cannot quantify just how monumental an experience London SWF 365 has been for me. As a carer of 2 disabled children and having physical energy limitations myself, I've never been able to attend the Screenwriters Festival before. Although some things may have been lost for regular attendees, for someone like me, it has opened up my writing world enormously. To be able to sit in my front room and ask questions of great screenwriters and producers while still being able to keep an eye on my sons has been utterly amazing. I've made new connections with other writers and connected with writers I already knew. Being online is still an exciting and special experience, and I've learned new things about production as well as writing, and it's always nice to see information you already knew confirmed as good advice. The only trouble I've had is keeping up with the huge amount of events that are on, and I sometimes have to catch up the following day, but that's only ever positive in just how much is being produced by the amazing hardworking team. I will be back every year until I die. Emily Isaacs, screenwriter. Now, Emily's been a little bit over the top there, but it is a sentiment that we heard repeatedly, particularly from women who would have been marginalized from the festival. So that was an extraordinary gift that we got out of the festival. Didn't expect it, didn't see it coming. Pretty obvious if you think about it retrospectively. And that was amazing. And we saw that. We did another event in February, very similar, and we saw exactly the same thing. So this new way of doing things is attracting new audiences. And putting it simply, it's the technology addresses their needs in terms of actually participating. And also they are prepared to do the thing that other people are not prepared to do, which is just enjoy it online. Other people, I don't want to do it online. Therefore, they have removed themselves from the possibility of what could come out of that. As an anecdote, Dave Reynolds, who's a friend of mine, he wrote Finding Nemo, and he came and spoke at both festivals. He's an amazing guy, very, very, very funny. And he shared that all executives now are taking pitches. So when you have an idea for a film or you've written a script and you want to pitch it to somebody, everything's on Zoom now. Everybody loves Zoom. You get down to it quickly. Nobody has to get stuck in traffic for hours. There's no chit chat and, you know, how you doing? You know, oh, good to see you. It's business, and it's everybody's become more efficient. Now you can either lean into that, or you can say, I don't want to do digital. And we're seeing a divide open up. We also discovered people were experiencing the festival on multiple devices, on multiple channels. What I mean by that is they may be watching on their computer while having a chat with somebody on their phone while watching Netflix on their TV. And their brain was able to cope with all of that. Probably most of us in this conversation now do that as well. So that's another big distinction between when you sit in an auditorium and you have total focus on the speakers versus when you're sat on your sofa or at your desk and you're kind of multitasking. And again, it's like we're up against that orangutan or a counter skateboard. So that resistance from many people was very, very present. And if you're feeling that, which I'm guessing you're not because you're actually online right now in this conversation, then beware. And I just shared the anecdote about pitching with Dave. We need to get into this technological, digital revolution. We need to really participate in it because there's clearly gold in the hills. And there's another interesting aspect, which I'm going to get to in a little while, just about how it's kind of proliferating, and it's really exciting news. So the digital revolution has happened. It is now in the past. We're now living in the legacy of the digital revolution and all of the impact, just like we're living in the legacy of the industrial revolution. So it's now digital evolution, and it's coming at us very, very rapidly. So my advice is don't look back, only look forward to opportunity. There's nothing back there. It's all in front of us. So I mentioned a moment ago about this distinction about the kind of proliferation of opportunity and power. And the 2021 digital entrepreneur, they're smaller entities. They're often individuals, but they're making greater impact than they've ever made before because you have a global stage. You can literally reach anyone, and you can make your audience as big as you want it. There is no restriction to it whatsoever, apart from that orangutan, which we keep coming back to. It's like, if you keep people's attention, if you give them something they want, if you serve their needs, then they will keep coming back. And this is all stuff I've learned. You know, again, a year and 2 months ago, I would be telling you about how we load a van with boxes and drive them to the venue and how we set up microphones and adjust the lighting. That would be the conversation we'd be having. So it's a crazy shift. I just want to go through the tech that we use to deliver online, because I'm always big on sharing how we do stuff, so that if you want to do something similar, you knew what we use. So first of all, Zoom has won the apocalypse. Congratulations, Zoom. And don't we all wish we had shares in it? So that's done. And phones, I don't know about you, but if my phone rings now, I look at it like, who the hell is this? How come they haven't sent me a text message to say I'm going to call you? Isn't that crazy? It's a crazy shift that's happened. My phone never rings. I just get invitations to join a Zoom chat. So for our shows, and we call them shows, our sessions that we run, like I would refer to this as a show, because again, the focus of it is I want your attention. I'm not giving you a seminar or a lecture. I'm giving you a show that has valuable information in it, but my energy is going to give you some fun, because that's how I keep your attention. So we use a tool called StreamYard, which allows us to vision mix live. It's super, super simple. But with StreamYard, you can deliver live TV with everybody feeding in with a webcam. It's fantastic. The paid version is $30 a month or something like that. We can afford it. We use Vimeo for streaming. So when we stream out to lots of different locations, we're using Vimeo. There are others that you can use, but we chose to use Vimeo because we also host our videos. So once it's been recorded, it goes into our Vimeo library, and we have probably somewhere in the region of 700 seminars available now to our Screenwriters Festival delegates. Everything, again, from huge, big screenwriters all the way to somebody who's just written their first episode of Doctors. And we use the technology that we put it onto is a combination of either WordPress, which is like a slightly sophisticated web tool, Jimdo, which is like kind of WYSIWYG, super easy web tool, and Kajabi. And Kajabi is like a teaching payment platform. If we did it again, I would probably go with Thinkific or Teachable, but we're so far down the line with Kajabi, it's just too painful to pull out of Kajabi. So I would go with probably Thinkific or Teachable. Basic cameras and microphone. I'm on a fancy camera now and a fancy microphone because we already had that kit. But normally there's another computer over here with a Logitech webcam and a separate microphone. That's completely adequate. I would argue that you want to think about your lighting. So I've got a light here, I've got a light here, and I've got a light here, and I've got these two lights behind here. I'm actually sitting in the loft right now, but it's nice and acoustically dead. So, you know, and I've got a nice microphone. So I think all of those things make a difference to the person participate. And then ticketing. So there's a philosophical kind of shift here, which I'll talk about in more depth in a moment, but you can either go with a one product fixes everything kind of deal, which is, you know, and these have all popped up in the last year, which is like an online festival or an online conference tool, and you pay one fee and they handle everything, but you have to work within their ecosystem. We tried many of them. They didn't work for us. They were too limited. So we use ticketing platforms like Eventbrite, which has gone through its own massive evolution because, like us, they sold tickets for live physical events, and last spring that business died overnight. And so they lost like 50% of their income in a single month. And so they kind of went off the radar, but they're back. But our new favorite one is Ticket Tailor, which is super cheap to use, 50p per transaction. Very, very nice, slick, and easy to use web tool. And it integrates with the payment gateways, PayPal and Stripe. Stripe allows you to take credit card payments. Now, all of this stuff, if you know, don't be afraid of it. It's super easy to set up. It will take you less than a day to do your very first iteration, and over a month you'll get very, very, very good at doing it. Of course, if you're going to do something like this, you may want to start a company. You may just keep it your own kind of side hustle, and you may want to do accounts. I mean, if you're, you know, bringing in £200, you don't need to really run accounts for that. But if you suddenly find yourself bringing in £35,000, yes, you need to have a company and declare that to the tax man. And then the final thing to think about is archiving. It's like, what do you do with all your stuff when you've created it? It's one of those things, you know, when we shot film, when we were making films and you shot film, at the end of it, someone would hand you a load of film and say, there you go, what do you want to do with it? But digital stuff kind of stays in the cloud or digitally over there. And then 2 years later, you go, where is it? And nobody knows. Or it's in an account that's got a dead email and you're locked out. So do think about archiving stuff as you go. We also have an app, which is hosted by a little tool called Yap, and Kajabi has an app as well. So people like to integrate with their phone, with their laptop, with the desktop, with their iPad, with the, you know, all of this stuff. We need to make it available on all platforms. Some other considerations as well. We would stream to Facebook, and we did that because it had the best chat function. So there would always be a very highly engaging conversation on Facebook. The downside of that is that Facebook would kick us off for copyright violation if we showed clips or music it didn't like. And sometimes the chat could get dominated by some very loud, opinionated voices. If you're going to run a small film festival or even a big festival, you may need to think about geo-blocking. So your film is only available in the country that you're running it in. and who's going to look after the quality control of the assets. So a film comes to you, who's checked it to make sure that the whole film is there, that it isn't corrupted, 20 minutes in, and that the picture and sound are all to professional standards. So there's a whole thing that needs to be done there. And again, I mentioned it earlier, is you could go with a total solution for this. So a site that says, we do everything, but you have to work the way we work, or you can hand build it and custom build it yourself. If you're going to do that, you are going to need somebody who enjoys technology in your team. It's not necessarily rocket science, but they kind of got to go, ooh, I get it, and I'm leaning into that excitedly. In terms of the team that we had a really, really small team. So usually it was me and a couple of other people running it. So the last one we ran in February, it was me, Bob Schultz, and Savannah Morgan. There were other people who were involved, but fundamentally we were the key three. We had an intern from a film school, Joe, who did all the vision mixing for us in StreamYard, and we had another guy called Ollie who would just make sure all our speakers would turn up at the right time, in the right platform, and looking presentable. So yes, there are technological considerations, there are logistical considerations, just making sure that people show up, and marketing. There's so much marketing to do. There's always more work than you anticipate, and I cannot overstate the importance of building the right team around you, because it's almost like a 24/7 job when you're running it. And the solutions happen at 11:30 at night, rarely at 2:30 in the afternoon. We're just going to whiz through marketing, because this is absolutely key if you're going to do something like this. Is you want to do some email capture, so you want a relationship with your customers. Now, if they're buying tickets directly off you, that's easy to do, but you also want to ask people to give you their email addresses within GDPR, so that you can sell them or tell them about what you're up to. Obviously, Instagram, Facebook advertising, blogs, which become a static resource that are very Google friendly, because Google likes it. If you get a blog that's particularly successful and popular, that will bring traffic for a decade. Twitter, we all know about, and LinkedIn, which is one where we don't do enough, largely because of fatigue. And then we get into Clubhouse, which didn't even exist 4 weeks ago. TikTok, oh my goodness, it's like, where does it end? You do have to draw a line somewhere. And then there's the old school stuff, getting in touch with the BBC and see if they will cover it, or the local newspapers. Most people overlook all of that stuff, and it has real value. So I really thoroughly recommend calling your local newspapers. And finally, there's affiliate and partnerships. So this is people who are in the same area as you, and you say, listen, if you talk about our thing, we'll give you a 20% kickback on every ticket we sell with your discount code. That way you can reach a much wider audience, and other people get to earn money by bringing people to you. So that's essential, really. And all of this requires, ideally, a constant presence, which is probably impossible, unless you actually have employed people full-time whose job it is to do this. So if not, you're going to be ramping it up a few months before your event, going crazy during it, and then ramping it down afterwards, and then capturing all of the lovely feedback that you get. And do remember, switch the damn phone off at some point, or you will go digitally insane, because it's just too dominating. And that FOMO that I talked about, the fear of missing out of an opportunity, is quite overwhelming at times. Now, when we go live, the first thing to do is, of course, rehearse. I'm used to doing this kind of thing to camera now. So you can probably tell I've got an energy, and I've got a pace, and I've got a rhythm. Not everybody has that. And I didn't have that when I began a year ago. So the key is rehearsing. It's obvious, but so many people don't do it. Stress test all your technology, because the moment you go live is the very moment it will fall over. So push it through all of the hoops that it's going to have to pass through. And also tech check with all your speakers. Everyone who's coming to join you, have a conversation with them beforehand. Make sure that they're not pointing their webcam at a window, that they've, the webcam isn't dirty, that you can hear them, that they can log in. Otherwise, you'll end up with sessions with people saying, hello, can you hear me? Hello, which, is fine in a Zoom meeting, but we don't want to be broadcasting that out to 1,000 people. And then have really, really clear communications with delegates. We found this absolutely critical. So many people would make massive assumptions about what we were doing. So we communicated with them very clearly with a very, very short email once a day. And that seemed to be just about enough to not overwhelm them, annoy them, but also make sure that they were kept up to date. And you're going to probably need a single person to help delegates who get lost in the digital biosphere of like, where is it happening? What is happening? What's going on? I'm a bit lost. And at the end, you want to capture feedback. It's one of the things many people forget to do. Send them to a feedback form, say, instruct them to write about how brilliant the experience was. And they will do that if they had a great time. And then you get to put that all over your social media and website. And that is important because it's social proof. You can also use things like Trustpilot, but we choose not to do that. Okay, so some final conclusions then for festivals large and small. The COVID echo may last beyond, let's say, a year. Let's say, I think it's a reasonable thought to say that by the summer of 2022, we should be really on top of COVID, assuming that there isn't a catastrophic variant. I think most people would agree, and hopefully before then, but I think there will be a lasting echo, some of it positive, like we don't need to fly people in from America, so therefore we don't need to contribute to global warming. Some of it positive, Emily Isaacs can join us from her sofa. Some of it may not be positive. People might be still thinking, I don't want to be in a room with people coughing and sniffling and getting on the tube, and there may be phobia and all sorts of reactions to that we have to consider. And also, I know from the pandemic, the Spanish flu pandemic was followed by the Roaring Twenties, when pretty much all of humanity went crazy for interaction and intimacy and close contact. So we may see that. We may see the opposite. There may be no fears and everybody's just desperate to get in. I mean, I've seen it. I don't know whether, I don't drink, so I've never really kind of understood this obsession with going to the pub. But blimey, Charlie, if there's one thing the British really want to do is go down the pub. So, maybe we'll see it invert in that way. But whatever we think, technology has shifted the world, and likely for the better. And I think from a global warming perspective and from an inclusion perspective, I think it's much better. And online and hybrid is going to deliver on diversity, because people who were excluded previously because they couldn't afford it, they couldn't get there, they couldn't afford hotels, they should be included now. And that's really quite important in 2021. So some final thoughts, which should be a nice list, but isn't. The technology is changing daily. The COVID situation, the Indian variant didn't exist 2.5 weeks ago, certainly in our knowledge, in our kind of like, this is something that we have to consider. That didn't exist. And who knows about the new normal? And we are definitely living in an age of digital overwhelm, where many of us go, oh, that's it, too much Zoom, I'm zoomed out. In fact, I suspect next year, when they do the updating the dictionary, who knows, zoomed out might actually be a phrase that makes it into the dictionary. And there's no doubt many of us, some of us have enjoyed engaging with Joe Wicks, and I went to the fridge. So, I include myself in the sedentary lifestyle that definitely needs to change. But yeah, that's a thing. So that's something that's happened that we need to consider. So we started at the end. I want to just circle back to that now and say, again, attention. I hope I've kept your attention for 55 minutes or just under 55 minutes. That's the currency of the digital world that we're in. And it's about profoundly serving your audience and delegates, meeting their needs, and even meeting the needs they didn't even know that they needed. And that's where your expertise truly comes in. So if you've got an idea to do something, and again, it can be small, it could be a chess club that comes together on Tuesday nights, or a small film festival, or a massive film festival. If you've got an idea, what are you prepared to do about it that others won't do? And sometimes it's really simple. It's as simple as, I'm just going to do it. You know, it turns out that the other people who play chess aren't prepared to do it. I'm prepared to do it. I'll make sure that we have a website and the technology, and it will all work, and it will be amazing. And you'll go on a journey and you'll learn amazing things, and that will make you eminently more hireable in the future in whatever field that you choose to be in, because you will have a skill set that is going to be needed more and more as we live into the future. Another simple way that most people in this sector succeed is they say, I'll just work harder than anybody else. I will literally, for a short sustained burst, for 7 weeks, I will work 18 hours a day on this one thing and nothing else. And that is enough to really push you through. So again, another way to look at it is, what is everybody else doing? Don't do that. Do something different. And there's gold in the digital hills, but you need to get out there and dig and get dirty. So I just want to briefly talk about two very final things before we open up for questions. One is, having interviewed over 1,000 people now in the context of the Guerrilla Filmmakers Handbook series, but also very recently in the 2 Screenwriters Festivals that we ran online, I would always ask somebody at the end of the interview, I'd say, what's one piece of advice you would offer to somebody chasing their dream? And almost all of them would say a version of this, and that's stolen from Joseph Campbell: follow your bliss and work hard and passionately, single-mindedly to achieve that goal. We live in a digital age of shiny, shiny things that constantly distract us. But if you can develop that laser focus, and if you love what you're doing within that laser focus, you will find success. So COVID last year gave us the opportunity to really, really fundamentally get a simple constant, which is change is constant. It's happening all the time. We're getting older, we're changing. Change is constant. Sometimes it's catastrophic and big, as it was with COVID. So then it can be rapid change. You can have a car crash and your life changes very, very rapidly. Progress, on the other hand, requires an active choice, and it requires action to follow through into it. So we can complain about how we want it to be. Other people don't complain. They get on and make it the way they want it to be, and fail spectacularly along that journey, and just have fun doing it.